was speaking out on injustices that led him into trouble and to making enemies in numerous arenas, including the MeToo movement. And a year before his death, so in 2017, he became a vocal advocate against sexual harassment in the restaurant industry, speaking out about celebrity chefs, naming them, but his ire was not limited to restaurants. Absolutely not. He went for Hollywood. He went for this man, Quentin Tarantino. He said that Quentin Tarantino was complicit in the Harvey Weinstein sex scandal, and he absolutely went for Harvey Weinstein. Absolutely, 100%. And in a minute, you'll see why. So let us just bring in Harvey Weinstein just to add to the mix. And one of the reasons that he went for Harvey Weinstein was because of his involvement with Asia Argento, a rebellious Italian actor who claimed she had been raped at Cannes Film Festival by Harvey Weinstein. So I want to look at Asia Argento, the woman many people still blame for the death of Anthony Bourdain. Well, he met Asia while filming Parts Unknown in Italy. It was season 8, episode 4. And rather than visit the glitzy places, as I've said, he always sought out the underbelly of the places he visited. On this occasion, and with Asia as his guide, they sat by a boxing ring where people beat crap out of each other as he ate dinner. His companion would turn out to be the person largely considered to be his last love, and who would lead him into waters that his loved ones wished he hadn't. So, who is Asia Argento, and why do so many people hold her responsible for his death? Well, as said, she is one of the main Harvey Weinstein accusers, who ended up being accused of being a paedophile herself, more of which later. But for outsiders, the couple were extremely passionate, but it was a toxic mix as well. Asia would later admit, we were alcoholics and depressed, but we loved each other. The two were involved for about 2 years in a tumultuous and very public relationship that Mr. Bourdain seemed willing to preserve at all costs. He substantially financially supported her. He spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on her, providing financial support to her, to her 2 children, and sometimes to her friends. And he sought to bring her in on his work. He insisted to co-workers that she direct and appear in his show. And I mean, the problem is, on this one occasion, this was actually the turning point where they said, where many of his crew said there was a real turning point in him when he got her involved in directing. And it was because of his regular director was sick. And so he immediately said, I want Asia to direct this. And she actually changed the whole format of it. And whereas previously before he was just left to do his own thing and have these incredible conversations with people, she wanted to script it more. She wanted to make it more Hollywood, and his crew were not happy. It's like this incredible, successful format, Parts Unknown, was suddenly being changed because the star was smitten with somebody who was probably not well equipped actually to be taking up the role as director. But we kind of all been there, I think, in some respects. I think many people can relate to that whole idea of when you're like in love with somebody, and if they're in similar, if there's any way that you can kind of help them out, you want to. That's the way human beings are, right? But what I was to discover was Asia would come with her own baggage, some of which wasn't discovered until after Bourdain's death. And as I said, despite being an accuser and an absolute leader of the MeToo movement, she was also the accused. And it turns out she was accused of sexually assaulting a 17-year-old when she was 37. And this was Jimmy Bennett, a young actor she had first met when he was just 7 years old. And he played her son in the 2004 film, The Heart is Deceitful Above All Things. She denied any involvement with him. She denied any sexual activity. But Unfortunately, the way of these things, images were leaked to TMZ, which appeared to show her in bed with the young male, added to which there were then texts which were leaked in which she admitted to having sex with him. And secretly, obviously the public didn't know any of this until well after Anthony Bourdain had died, but secretly Anthony Bourdain wanted to protect his girlfriend. So he hired a private detective to investigate Jimmy Bennett. And he ended up actually paying Bennett off with a $380,000 settlement. And what happened was, after Argento came out and said, I was raped by Harvey Weinstein, Jimmy Bennett came forward and said, what is she talking about? She raped me when I was underage, because obviously the age of consent is different in America. And so what ended up happening was Anthony Bourdain ended up paying him off with a $380,000 settlement. And in a letter actually published online in September 2018, so several months after Anthony's death, Argento's attorney finally admitted that there was a sexual encounter, however, claimed that Jimmy Bennett sexually attacked Argento, which doesn't really work, does it, when there's been a massive secret payoff like this? Argento said it was just, Anthony just felt it was the right thing to do. Jimmy Bennett was troubled. We just wanted to get rid of this. We didn't want it to interfere with what was going on with him. But it looks bad, doesn't it, that a leading woman in the MeToo movement has been involved in a substantial payout to a young boy that she's accused of sexually assaulting. That looks horrendous. The optics are terrible, right? And I think that picture is very, very alarming. Clearly, it really is. And once the texts were leaked of her actually admitting to it, it was kind of all done. The thing is, at the time that Anthony met Asia, he was vulnerable. His second marriage had broken down and he was actually rebounding, and he quickly became smitten with the Italian actor. And she was 20 years his junior. And people around him, they made lots of quotes. There were a number of documentaries and books made after his death, and really enlightening quotes from his crew. One of them was, when Tony met Asia, he was like, she's the best. My God, she's so great. And his crew compared him to like a smitten schoolboy. They said he was like a teenage boy. And that after the initial meeting with her, when they filmed Parts Unknown in Rome, he said that the episode would not have been possible without her or be anything like it was. He described her as truly magnificent. He went on to detail all the places she had taken him, but he also gave an insight into her that would, many say, lead him to taking his life in a French hotel room. And he said of Argento that she's always honest, completely unsparing, and I'm quoting him directly. If you ask Asia a question, you're going to get an answer, and she doesn't care if it reflects badly on you or on herself. Asia has never given a F. Her admission that she never votes is both terrible and true, and about as close to home as it gets. The last word appropriately is hers, and that was in the program. But very quickly after the program, by February 2017, the media were reporting that the two had fallen in love. Bourdain began posting photos of her on his Instagram alongside captions like, "Just a perfect day, you made me forget myself." He was clearly smitten. But as you will see, there is a real darkness to Asia Argento, and I'm going to be revealing that very, very shortly. And Bourdain told People magazine that he was happier for sure with Argento in his life. "It's nice to be with somebody who I see as a peer," he said, which feels a bit disparaging of his previous wives. Let me have a glug of water and lemonade, people. So I want to drill down on what do we know about Asia Argento, because this was arguably his last love, the woman he was last with, the woman he was texting with last before his death, and somebody who clearly had a massive influence on him. So now I need to bring in some more images, and I don't know if I've got space here to do it, but let me try my best, because I think this is so important. Let me just remove some of these. You know how it is, kids, when you're doing this yourself. I appreciate it's not necessarily as smooth as if there was a production team working with me, but we get by, don't we? We get by very well indeed. Right. I want to bring in some images now because I think that they are important. And there we go. Right. So let's have a close look at the woman who captured his heart. And this is where it truly gets dark. As I say, she was his last big love, and she came with a dark side to her. And in researching this, my contact had said to me, you should also look at the Vigilant Citizen blogger. Now, I'm very familiar with that blog site and have been for many, many years. This is an excellent blog site that looks into the dark side, really, of music industry, of acting, is absolutely aware of imagery and symbology that is used. And the Vigilant Citizen has done a deep dive into Asia Argento, and I will put a link in the description at the end of this. But I picked up some brilliant information, and obviously shout out and credit to the Vigilant Citizen for this, because what the Vigilant Citizen says in talking about Asia Argento is, one cannot ignore the fact that Bourdain was fully invested and involved in Argento's life and world in the months leading to his death. And this world is pure occult elite. And as I say, in fact, the Vigilant Citizen has done some tremendous digging on Asia Argento, and I'm grateful to be able to draw on that research for this live investigation. So first of all, a bit about Asia Argento. Well, she's the daughter of the movie actress Dario Nicolodi and the Italian director and producer father Dario Argento. And her father was very much involved in the horror film genre from the 1970s and the 1980s, notably in the subgenre known as giallo, which mixes kind of like elements of occultism, eroticism, psychological torture, trauma, you name it. And Asia would star in a few of her father's productions. And there is more than a little whiff of that kind of like monarch mind control about some of the earlier productions that she was involved in. She began acting at the age of 9. By the age of 18, she'd starred in her father's movie Trauma, and it featured her escaping from a psychiatric hospital, people being decapitated, and her mother being electroshocked after the death of her baby. Now, all of that sounds, doesn't it, like monarch mind control? It sounds like MK Ultra, very much so. And the fact is that Asia has a history of occult productions and behavior. She also starred in the Three Mothers trilogy, which is about a triad of evil, powerful witches stationed across the world. And I'm reading from the bump here, stationed across the world to manipulate humanity on a global scale. And also, she didn't hide it herself. On social media, she actually referred to herself as a witch. She often could be found on social media in imagery that was clearly problematic. Here is a typical example of one of her Instagram posts. And her social media is actually full of occult elite related images, like chock-a-block full. And some of the posts are just screaming at you. She's routinely pictured covering her eye as one example, but there's more. Let me give you some more. I mean, there's an image where she's with her children. This is all on her social media, right? So I'm going to show it. This is where she and her 2 children look. I mean, she's in the middle. So I don't know if you're familiar with what's going on here. So obviously her son is doing the triangle, which is often associated with Freemasonry and more. She's in the middle doing the, which is so associated with Baphomet and more, the as above, so below, where she's kind of like pointing upwards. And then there's her daughter with doing the one eye. And that's kind of like the stuff that she posts on social media, which I think is frankly a bit creepy. But that might just be me. But I don't think so. I think that some of my viewers will be alarmed by some of this imagery that we're showing here. Here's another one, which is this actually, interestingly, she posted this on the day that, or the days leading up to, if not the actual day, when she was going to speak at Cannes Film Festival. And that's when she talked about Harvey Weinstein, and she posted that. And it was with this whole idea that, you know, we're watching you. But just some more to give you. I think you're getting a flavour now, aren't you? I think it's quite easy to get a flavour with her. This, as one example, let me just see if I've got the right one here. I mean, I think that kind of speaks for itself, right? I mean, who wears, hoodies or jackets or whatever with Lucifer on the back of it, right? So there's so much on her social media that is absolutely deeply, deeply disturbing. And Anthony Bourdain would have seen this. I mean, as one example, she's visiting this kind of a Joe Coleman's auditorium, right? So like an event, which is like a personal collection of the guy's creepiest stuff. And she's holding two what's supposed to be deformed babies in jars. And it's just weird. And here's another one, which I think is odd as well. She called this Blood Sisters. And look at this. And I don't know about you, but that kind of looks a little bit like real blood. I'm not sure. But either way, whether it is or it isn't, it's a graphic image. And you'd never see me posting anything like this. Any of the images that she's posted are not normal. That's not normal posting. I mean, clearly, this was somebody with a very dark side to her, very dark side to her. She repeatedly posted things like devil horns, one eye hidden. She had kind of Illuminati signs behind her. It's just endless, just absolutely endless. And I think really what's important with what the vigilant citizen is attempting to convey, and I agree, is it's not about blaming Asia Argento for Anthony Bourdain's death. It is an examination of the context with which Bourdain found himself during the last period of his life. The reality is, we might never actually completely know what led to Bourdain's death. But what we do know, unquestionably, was via Asia Argento, he was surrounded by lots of occult elite people. And in this kind of twisted and depraved context, things can get very dark very fast. And that is a reality. And that is exactly what the vigilant citizen is pointing out. And I agree. But nonetheless, Anthony Bourdain was absolutely smitten with Argento, and she inspired him to speak out more and more about Hollywood abuse. And he said, I started speaking out about it out of a sense of real rage. He said, I'd like to say that I was only enlightened in some way, or I'm an activist or virtuous, but in fact, I have to be honest with myself. I met one extraordinary woman with an extraordinary and painful story who introduced me to a lot of other women with extraordinary stories. And suddenly it was personal. Well, it appeared to be very personal, because then he did a mea culpa. In an article in Medium magazine in December 2017, he wrote this essay taking responsibility for his own actions or inaction over the years. He wrote, to the extent which my work in Kitchen Confidential celebrated or prolonged a culture that allowed the kind of grotesque behaviors we're hearing about all too frequently is something I think about daily with real remorse. And as I will explore towards the end of this piece, one must also ask whether his own demons may have included what he had also been involved with, perhaps, because he was certainly around some very, very dark people. And in 2018, just months before his death, I mean, literally just months before his death, Argento delivered this incredibly powerful speech at the Cannes Film Festival. And it was about the toxic behavior that had been permitted at the event over many years. She said, in 1997, I was raped by Harvey Weinstein here at Cannes. I was 21 years old. And she said this on stage during the closing ceremony. She said this festival was his hunting ground. That's what she said. She was absolutely determined to nail this man, no doubt about it. And Bourdain said about the speech that from the second she said she'd been invited to present an award, I knew it would be a nuclear bomb. I was so proud of her, he said. It was absolutely fearless to walk right into the lion's den and say what she said, the way she said it. It was an incredibly powerful moment. I thought I am honored to know someone who has the strength and fearlessness to do something like that. And as a consequence of that, he himself became an incredibly powerful advocate. His X account is still up. You can see he tweeted a lot about the issue. He did. He didn't care who he was upsetting in Hollywood, which when you're working for CNN, that's as Hollywood as it gets, really, right? So you're in choppy waters already, because the chances are he was already starting to attack people who may have an influence on him and his life. Okay, no doubt about it. But he continued to speak publicly. He said he took responsibility for toxic masculinity. He talked frankly about allegations concerning his own friends. He took celebrities to task on Twitter, as it was then known, for remaining silent about Weinstein, including Donna Karan and Matt Damon. And he also went so far as to describe his own death fantasy that he had about Harvey Weinstein. But his second wife, Ottavia Busia, an Italian lawyer, no, an Italian businesswoman. She originally thought that kind of like his public crusade in the kind of whole Me Too movement was very noble, she said, but it turned to the point that he became obsessed with it. Now, this may well be because he wanted to impress Asia. He wanted them to be on the same page, and this was a driving force for her. Who knows? But it could have been his own demons driving him. As I say, it could have been a sense of guilt. He may have had his own fair share of issues, and it may have been that when he decided to write that piece in Medium, he did it because he wanted to kind of like show that he wasn't entirely some sort of virtuous angel, but he didn't necessarily want to tell all. I'm just kind of guessing here. I don't know. I couldn't possibly know his thought process behind him deciding to say, hands up, I've been a baddie, but without actually implicating himself in anything too horrendous. Right. But what was absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, was that he was absolutely obsessed with Asia Argento. He was obsessed with her, and he fired long-term workers who disagreed with him. And it got to the stage where nobody dared say anything bad about her, even though she was clearly a troubled and problematic addition to his life. And the final act of their love was kind of like Shakespearean in many respects. It was in June 2018. He was filming an episode of Parts Unknown in Strasbourg in France. A tabloid printed photo suggesting that Argento was cheating on him with a French reporter. Then two sets of photos circulated, one showing Argento dancing in a Roman restaurant with the journalist, another set of photos showing Argento and the reporter holding hands, hugging on the streets of Rome, which I'm showing you now. And in the documentary Roadrunner, which was made after his death, one Parts Unknown co-worker recalls how furious Anthony Bourdain was when he saw these pictures. He very heartbreaking. And there was a final text with Miss Argento as well on the day of his death, which we will get to. But actually, what he said prior to that in response to these pictures. So the idea was that they supposedly had an open relationship, right? But they were supposed to at least be discreet with each other, because they were often never together. I mean, he was touring close to 300 days a year, right? And so they were often in different parts of the world because his schedule was super, super busy. And so they had this kind of open relationship, but openly hugging people and meeting in the hotel where you have special memories with Anthony Bourdain, which she did, and the photographer taking these pictures, and she was with a French paparazzi as well, right? So all of this was completely indiscreet, and Anthony and Asia, they text about this, and he said, "I'm okay. I am not spiteful. I am not jealous that you have been with another man. I do not own you. You are free. As I said, as I promised, as I truly meant. But you were careless. You were reckless with my heart, my life. The only thing that hurt," he wrote, "was that the tryst took place in the Rome hotel that they loved. And he asked for her mercy. She wrote, I can't take this." And that's kind of like the start of an insight into her. I think that One of the reasons that people, and certainly people close to him, did not trust her was there was a coldness to her. That even though he was clearly emotionally very, very broken about these images being made public, she was like, I can't take it. You're too possessive. And she told him that she couldn't stand his possessiveness. She could no longer stay in the relationship. And that was the days leading up to his death. And they filmed in France. And after the filming, Anthony went out by himself, and then he had his last text exchange with Miss Argento. And he texted her saying, "Is there anything I can do?" And she responded, "Stop busting my balls." His response was, "Okay." That evening, he was said to have hanged himself. Feel a bit shivery repeating that, because when you start to understand the events that led up to it, it appears dark in its own way. His brother, Chris Bourdain, said, "My brother committed suicide. I think if someone else had been in his room, it might have been a murder and not a suicide. I think he was just having explosive anger, and this was his only way out." And but his brother went on to say in interviews that the whole thing was a very unpremeditated act. And in fact, Anthony was planning and prepping that very day for his life. He was giving notes on edits that afternoon. He was making lunch reservations with a friend for the next week. He was in touch with his assistant, and I'll tell you what she had to say shortly. Many people feel that it was because he was kind of like in a remote part of the world. France is not that remote, right? And it's only a hop, skip away from Italy. So he certainly could have gone and seen Asia, or vice versa, right? Because I think she was in Italy at the time. And he, but as his brother said, I know he had thoughts about suicide before. He had written about it. He'd been talking about killing himself forever. That's what they said. I just don't think anybody ever thought that he would actually do it. And again, I have known people in my life who have said on a regular and frequent basis, "I've had enough of this world. I want to leave it. Had enough of it." And that is something that people often say. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they are really going to follow through. It doesn't mean that. And the other interesting thing, I think, was one of the main documentaries that was made after his death, Roadrunner. The producer talked to people all around him, and it was absolutely evident that they did not like or trust Asia Argento. Lots of people blamed her. And in fact, Asia Argento is not even included in the film. And the director realized that he would lose faith with Anthony's friends if she was involved. She was unpopular. People blamed her. They said that she cheated on him and he doted on her, but she had betrayed him, and in the city that he had met her and fell in love with her in. And the director said, "I pretty much know what she'd say, which is that she loved him and felt misrepresented by people. I also knew, honestly, that to interview her, you would incur a lot of bad blood from lots of people in Tony's life. So there was a price to pay too." And there is little doubt that Argento being publicly pictured with another man hurt Anthony. But was it enough for him to take his life? And I think really that this is where you have to start kind of like drilling down on what happened on the day. So obviously, we've already established that he had a series of phone calls in the days leading up to and on the day of his death. And so I want to just go back to what actually happened on the day. They were shooting episodes of Parts Unknown, and what ended up happening was he skipped dinner on the Thursday night, and he didn't show up for breakfast the next day either. And he was actually with his long-term friend Eric Rippart, and it was Eric Rippart, who's also a celebrity chef, who actually found him. And there is no denying that Bourdain's influence was enormous, and almost certainly including on his friend Eric Rippart as well. And what happened on the last night was these series of events essentially came together. So Pictures were being prepared to be published online just hours before he was said to have taken his own life. This was in addition to the ones that had already been published. These pictures were, as I say, with a French journalist, Hugo Clement. And this again is a reminder of it. And actually, Hugo had reported on Asia Argento's speech at Cannes Festival. So they went back a little bit. And also, Asia Argento has a very interesting taste in men, frankly, and that was her kind of man after Anthony Bourdain's death was another journalist who was sentenced to a year in jail for reportedly blackmailing celebrities with photos and collecting money not to publish the images. Um, and But the thing is, oh wait, no, I've got that. No, this was before. Sorry, this was before Anthony. And so she was just kind of like involved in a series of this during Anthony rather. She was just involved with a series of dodgy men, often journalists, and one of them had been in prison for allegedly, well, not allegedly, because if he was in prison, he'd been found guilty of attempting to blackmail celebrities. So this is interesting stuff. She's around some interesting people and dubious and dark, to say the least, right? I think the testimony of his assistant, the last communication she had with him are very insightful. Her name is Laurie Woollever. She wrote a book called Care and Feeding. She talked about her last communication with Anthony, including about the pictures. She had worked with Anthony from 2009 until his death in 2018. She was somebody he trusted. She checked in on him on the Thursday night because photos of Argento kissing the French journalist were about to be published online. And she told her boss, "I hope you're doing okay." To which he replied, "I'll live and will survive." And the assistant believed that the "we" referred to Bourdain and Asia Argento, that our relationship will survive this. But Bourdain instructed his assistant to ignore any of the journalists reaching out, including the National Inquiry, ignore any similar queries from any publications regarding Asia and these pictures. But he did express some interest because he said, "Let me know when the National Inquirer piece drops." But he was planning ahead. Laurie's assistant said, for the most part, he was planning ahead. A routine went on as normal. He asked her, even though he was in France, he asked her to schedule a lunch, a haircut, a doctor's appointment, and a private jiu-jitsu session for his return to New York the next week. That doesn't sound like the thinkings or the actions of a man who's planning to take his own life. Although, and I've said this before, when the altered mind state can be such that you can change in a second. You can go from "I'm going to live" to "I'm going to die." You can. It has happened. But that suggests that even though he was already feeling really like emotionally bogged down with these images of the woman that he loved very deeply, and she was clearly now messing around with all manner of people, even though she later said that they were said to be in an open relationship and that he also was messing around with people. But nonetheless, he was clearly in a very fragile state. And so obviously, the moment that you hear that he's taken his life and you hear about all of these events, it's like, oh, well, that makes sense. But does it though? Or is it just convenient? I mean, is it just convenient that these series of events happen because other things were being planned against him?